when I talk to people about starting a business, I'm really conscious of don't call it Kathy Young's Cushions, because you might not want to do cushions in 2 years' time. So the name has to be broad, and I also like names that you kind of go, what is that? Yeah, so it worked, yeah. Yeah, so it's nothing more than that. But I do get asked, is there such a thing as a bearded pigeon, by Americans probably once a week.
So have you Googled that? Is there?
No, but I say that there is, yeah.
Like, talk about that, though, it'd be like a drop bear opportunity.
That's what, yeah, I was just saying that.
We were talking about that.
They have little pouches, yeah.
Well, look, probably, to start with, this session is really about the power of networking. And I know a lot of people sometimes, it can have negative connotations with, networking and getting out there, and is that a good use of time or a bad use of time, and how powerful are networks? And are they more than just, drinks with mates? So when we talk about Etsy, Cath, how important has Etsy been to you in actually not only establishing your business, but then other like-minded people?
I think the thing with Etsy is they very much see their sellers as Etsy. So the corporation is not Etsy, the sellers are Etsy, and the sellers are referred to as the community. So it's the Etsy community, which is 1.3 million sellers around the world. And 24 million people signed up to Etsy as shoppers. So it's a big chunk. The sense of community within Etsy has been the key to its success, I think. It's very much about encouraging everyone to get to the top rather than competing against each other. So 94% of Etsy shop owners are women. So I think that's a big part of it. That sense of community amongst women has really, there's teams within Etsy as well, and I think that's kind of helped everyone.
So how do they do that practically? Like, some people here may be part of the Etsy community, but many may not. So when you say it's all about helping each other, sort of, get to the top, practically? What does that mean?
There's lots of, I do lots of mentoring. So I have a small team within Etsy. So there's captains and teams, and it's does sound a bit cultish, like when I explain it, so I'm aware of that. But my team is Etsy Parents, Australia, New Zealand, so we're all mothers. We've got 2 dads in our team of 300. And a lot of what we do is just supporting each other with that practical stuff of, like, I can't find this thing, how do you do this on Etsy, like software things, but also just sometimes people having a bit of my kids are driving me crazy, and we all go, yeah, it's hard, and that's, and sometimes that's just a little vent.
Yes.
But we kind of always try and keep it positive and don't get too much into this is all too hard and this is... So the community, I kind of try and keep it supportive but light-hearted and not too negative. So
what would be the main kind of questions or themes that your members are asking support on?
Why can't I get more sales, basically? There's lots of confusion about SEO and being found within Etsy, and that can be really confusing. I think sometimes people focus too much on the how to get found, whereas our thing is actually just focus on making a good product and taking really good photos of it, and that will actually help you more than spending hours reading huge amounts of information on SEO that's really confusing, and one thing contradicts another, and they kind of get into that headspace. So it's just really just take a step back, work on your product, go outside, go for a walk, just step back. Don't get so into the headspace, and don't get into that obsessive, I need to know everything about everything. So just slowing it down. So it's kind of just also, you watch people kind of go through that stage when they first start. You can't just put things on Etsy and expect that they're going to sell. You need to market it in some sense, but you don't have to do everything all at once. So just go slowly and work it out as you go along, and we can answer all the practical, how do I do that, how do I find that kind of thing.
So, Cynthia, you've been yourself, as we've just heard, both an entrepreneur in your own right, but now with Global Network, obviously being there to both inspire and encourage and support women, especially expand internationally. What are some of the challenges that you've seen with women sort of wanting to expand internationally? But importantly, how do they start in trying to sort of get those networks and think big?
So we work with women who have established businesses. So we don't actually work with startups. And the reason we do that is because we need to ensure that the business already has a proven business model. Having said that, we all know the stories of startups. They've been started in the garage, they've been going 5 months and they sell their business for $1 million to Google. So we have to be a little bit flexible around that. But generally what happens is that we sort of classify the women that we support into probably 3 main categories. So the first category are what we would call emerging exporters. So these are women who have already, either on a reactive or proactive basis, have already engaged in international business somehow. So you might ask, what's reactive, what's proactive? Proactive is, I've made the decision that I want to export to, US or China or wherever it may be, and I'm going to go down that path. The reactive is when you're working at your computer and you've clearly got an online business of some form, and somebody sends you an email from China and says, I really like your product, I'd like to order 2 containers next month, can you sort that out for me? And that's when you think, how the hell do I do that? And then the other category are probably aspiring exporters. So these are women-led businesses that would like to grow those businesses internationally but don't know where to start. And this is where the word inspiration becomes very, very important. And the final category is those that are, experienced exporters. And they might need assistance in us showing them how to enter one particular country relative to another country. So if they're already successful exporters, as I know you are, to the US, that's great, but if you all of a sudden decide you want to export to China, that's a whole different kettle of fish. So the inspiration, our tagline is inspiring Australian women to international success. And inspiration has actually turned out to be the most important word, I think, that in probably all the words that we use in this particular organisation. Because what I have found over the last 5 years, I sort of set up this program 5 years ago for government, was that even though there are incredibly successful women out there with fantastic businesses, be they startups, be they established businesses, and I know we have touched on this a little bit this morning, I spend most of my time tapping those successful women on the shoulder and saying, you should be putting your name forward to go on that trade mission. You should be putting your name forward to go and get some finance from, whether it's debt financing or equity financing. You should put your name forward for an awards program. You should put your name forward for being a member of our organisation or another organisation. The constant feedback I get from these incredibly successful women is, oh, do you think that I'm experienced enough for that? And this is sort of, I suppose, feeds back, and I'm sorry, I know I'm going off topic a little bit, but this feeds back to what we were talking about this morning, about education, about the parental messages we give our children. What is it that we're doing as a society when we're socialising our women to say, don't put your hand up, don't put your name forward, because, you'll be considered a tall poppy and you'll be cut down. I might stop there because I know I'm taking up too much time.
So, given you've seen so many women and you are trying to reach out, touch and inspire, what would be 3 pieces of advice you'd give to many of the women here today?
Well, the first is, as we heard before, Sheryl Sandberg had said, lean in. You do have to, whether it's lean in or put your hand up. You really, people aren't. I fell into this trap myself, I have to say, as an entrepreneur. I sort of was working on my business, and we're all sort of very busy running our own businesses, and you don't do much self-promotion because you're focusing on your business. And I was in fact approached really on a reactive basis when media came to me and said, "Can you do a TV interview," or whatever it might be. And then, the sort of light bulb moment came on. I thought, oh, this is actually quite good for my business, that there's a newspaper article or so forth. So it is hard for women because I think that, we have all these unconscious and conscious messages in society that are telling women, particularly in Australia. I think this is across the border, by the way, in all countries, because I think it's different in some other countries. But particularly in Australia, the messages are, just sit in the corner and be quiet. So my most important, point of advice would be put your name forward in everything you do, and tell your daughters and tell your nieces and tell your cousins and all the girls, within your ecosystem to do the same. The second piece of advice I would say is to take advice. It's amazing how men I think also fall into this category. This is not specific to women. But they have a great idea for a business, they start working on it, and they don't look at the ecosystem of what sort of support is out there. And look, I'm currently working for government, but I don't mind you bashing government, that's fine. Government doesn't get it right all the time. But the one thing government does do, it is there to give you advice, and a lot of that advice is free. And you should really take advantage of that. I mean, the number of times I've spoken to women-led businesses and they wanted to do some market research on a particular market, or PR, that's another good example, gone out to get private sector advice, that's great, but they've ended up paying, $15,000, $20,000, $25,000, $30,000 for it. If they would have gone to government, they would have got a lot of that free. So advice, and I suppose the third thing is, this is the subject of our session today, is networking. Networking is absolutely critical, and how we network as women, which I'm sure you're going to ask us in a minute, so I won't jump the gun. How you network is critical.
Well, on that point, Karen, maybe let me pass across to yourself. From Slingshot's perspective, obviously being an accelerator, that can both help. The whole idea of it is to really sort of further those sort of aims. And I understand you've got a client here with us today.
We do, yeah.
So maybe, again, for the benefit of everyone, just a quick intro into what Slingshot does, and then really how important is that more formalised network and support that Slingshot can provide, particularly, obviously, for startups.
Yeah. So we're a corporate startup accelerator. So the way I describe it, and it might not be officially on our website, but I look at it as basically matchmaking between corporates and startups. I spent 7 years at Yahoo running online dating, so I've had experience of...
So that could be a whole other topic.
Right? Spent 7 years helping people have sex for a living. Now I'm helping businesses actually connect together, hopefully for really fantastic commercial outcomes. But there's a different outcome there, so we won't go there. But I think, at its truest form, it's really that matchmaking of marketplaces, which is, there's supply and demand. And there are so many corporations out there that fundamentally everything from a board that is always about risk and governance and actually everything that fundamentally cuts the legs off innovation, that all flows through a corporate that actually makes innovation very, very hard, let alone if you can actually attract the kind of talent that you want in an organisation and your employer brand is strong enough to get those really cool guys and those really cool chicks that are doing awesome things in their garage or in their beautiful lounges that may or may not look like this. Isn't this a beautiful room today, by the way? Yeah, so thank you for your designers. So, at its heart, it's about that matchmaking process of really helping those corporates who also, I think, at the point that it really is that CEO and that executive team that have made a decision that can honestly look at their business and say, you know what, we're not really good at this. And even if we were kind of good at it, the chances are we'd probably kill it before it became anything fantastic. So why don't we look out there in a different space where there's some amazing things going on, and actually what these people really need is investment or connections or networks And I think that's the beauty of these two marketplaces effectively coming together, which is, yes, you can go to funds and get investments, but still you've got to know, how do I grow my business? I may have money, but actually I may run out of steam. I may run out of resources before my business has even got anywhere. So what if we could save you $500,000 because we've just connected a business to a corporate? And it all comes back to knowing your client. So our client is the corporate. So that executive team will say, right, we have 4 strategic imperatives. For HCF, that might be genomics. It might be looking at aged care. For Simplot, there are a number of other attributes that they were looking for. So we really kind of say, right, it's not everything. We've got to kind of narrow it down to also make sure that we're selecting the right startups or the right scale-ups. Scale-ups being businesses that are already proven. So it always comes back to knowing your client. Then it's much easier to then actually source and find those right startups or scale-ups. But it is a little bit like the X Factor, because we get a lot of applications, then we kind of whittle them all down. And then particularly with Simplot at the moment, we're working with 3 scale-ups, of one of which is Anna's business. But just an example of that, I came from a workshop we ran with them on Friday. And, it's just great to see, the staff within this corporate be so excited about the opportunities of working with Anna's business. And even from, a manager's perspective, seeing that kind of enthusiasm about we're doing something really cool, we're doing something really exciting, fundamentally shifts that corporate culture in a way that they would have really struggled before. And part of my role also is about, there's always going to be challenges inside that organisation of, we're disrupting what happens to my job, we've got these relationships with suppliers, and there's always going to be a little bit of friction. And it's really about helping them understand, well, there's a business as usual and there's disruption. And the whole point of doing this is often about, this is disruption, or this is going to bring you into markets. Now, if they'd have tried to do something that Anna's done, that probably would have taken them 3 years from beginning to end. Now, they already know that there is a commercial outcome that's working.
Yep.
So there were conversations about getting her into China. We're going to be doing some trials. So it's really, really exciting about where we can take Anna's business and then accelerate that really quickly. And if we think about that from the Australian economy perspective, or if we actually start to really invest in scale-ups, we're going to see a fundamental shift of our economy. And there's been a really interesting study, I don't know if anyone's seen it, in the UK, and Nesta actually did it, and they found that of high growth businesses, 6% of those businesses were responsible for 50% of new job creation in the UK. So say that again. 6% of high growth businesses were responsible for 50% of all new job creation in the UK. So that is why startups are important, but also the power of networking, which is, once you've got a business and a product and it's moving, we have to work out how we help these connections and these networks to really empower these scale-up businesses to grow.
So given that importance, and again, different people have different views, but networking is sometimes perceived as a dirty word.
Yeah.
So open question to the panel, why? Why does that sometimes have negative connotations? And we as, female business people, what could we be doing to change that impression?
I might start. To be honest, I actually don't know why it is a dirty word in Australia. I spent 20 years overseas living in 4 different countries. Every time I moved to a new country, I had no network, so I had to start from, ground zero and sort of build up my network. Lived there for a number of years, then moved to the next country, had to do exactly the same thing. And I just sort of naturally understood, well, if you're running a business or whether you're in a corporate, you need to know people to get things done, and you need to enable those connections and do some very good strategic and bridge networking to actually achieve your own objectives, but help other people that you're working with achieve their objectives as well, whether they're your employees or your colleagues or your boss or so forth. I don't know. I think in Australia it may still be related to the tall poppy syndrome. Don't put your name out there. Don't big note yourself. Certainly don't do self-promotion. I mean, I might just share one sort of tiny little anecdote. In one of the businesses I was running in Central and Eastern Europe, I engaged this Canadian guy And I didn't know at the time, I engaged him as a consultant, I didn't know at the time he was also a part-time actor. I only sort of found that out later. But he was probably the best self-promoter I have ever come across. So he would do the tiniest little thing, usually not on his own, with a team, but within 5 minutes he'd be, well, this is in the days before the internet, he'd be, sending out mail shots and phoning up journalists and saying, we did this, we did that. And initially it sort of irritated me, and because coming from an Australian background, I thought, why is he doing that? And then eventually the penny dropped and I thought, but hey, he's getting all this traction as a result of that. And very interestingly, he combined, as I later found out he was an actor, he combined his consultancy role in HR, which is really nothing much to do with acting, got more acting roles as a result of it, and then because people saw him in these, bit parts in films, then he got more consultancy work as a result of that. So it was this real lesson for me that, again, it's leaning in, putting your name out there, that I don't know why we consider it a negative thing, but I think we have to get over it.
Cath, what about you?
I don't know if I don't know if it's necessarily a negative thing or if it's just a thing that people are maybe fearful of. So sometimes it's like networking, I don't do that, because I don't really know what it is. It's really just about being friendly and talking to people, but it sounds complicated, or it sounds like there's some kind of negative agenda behind it, when it's really just about meeting people and and seeing if there's any place for you to work together, or seeing if whatever, like mentoring or whatever. But I think the way Etsy has done that is to call it being part of the community, which is really just networking, but they've called it something different, and it makes it a bit less scary, I think. Yeah. So
I think that's a really important point. I had an opportunity over the last few months to come across someone who, it is about networking, but he calls it's about connections. And it's really about sort of understanding the power of what every single person knows and who you know and how you can help someone else. And it's actually forming the connections between individuals. And people seem to resonate with that a lot more than necessarily networking amongst sort of individuals.
Because the word help is in there,
yes.
So that makes people feel more comfortable than get.
Yes.
Sometimes it's got that, like, networking is about getting something from someone rather than helping them or introducing them and sort of like lifting them up rather than
I think that's the big shift.
Climbing over them.
A lot of people look at networking or meeting somebody, it's about what can I get from you and how can you help me. And actually really our perspective should be shifted. It's really about, first of all, for you to ask someone of anything, there has to be some kind of value exchange. Otherwise, actually, the whole concept of networking doesn't really work, and it's a very selfish way to approach businesses. And I think if you can come at networking with it from a position or a viewpoint of generosity, now whether that's about learning or sharing, but there should be some kind of value exchange there. The worst thing you can possibly do is, meet somebody, get their card, connect to them on LinkedIn, and then there's no investment in that relationship. Now that might be that you're going to somewhere and you might say, hey, you might want to join me on this, or I've just read this great article, I thought your business might be interested in. I mean, there's lots of different ways, but it's really about giving before you receive. And then I think the other one is just the fear factor of entering a room of strangers. I don't know, how many people actually enjoy networking? I actually really like it. But I'm actually a hairdresser's daughter, so I think that came from like dad always saying to me, like, meet and greet the customers, and you'd never know who would walk in through the door. But they just had these wonderful women and men just had amazing stories, and how lucky was I to be part of that for 20 minutes shampooing their hair. But that fear factor of meeting a stranger for the first time, I think the more you do it, the more you become comfortable with it. And whether you met somebody today and really enjoyed the conversation and a story was exchanged, then I think you walk away going, that wasn't as bad as I expected it to be. But I think we also have to take responsibility that when somebody walks into your group, you don't necessarily just ignore them. Yes, hi, actually, what we're just discussing is this. And I think we need to be better about including people in, and I think we need to learn some manners and grace about how to do that too.
I think the other important thing, which is a really sound word, is that generosity. The other piece of advice I was given recently with respect to networking is to take the pressure off yourself, is remove time. It doesn't need to happen today, tomorrow, next week, next month.
Probably
if
won't.
there's a genuine connection, remove that pressure from yourself. Understand, who and why you want to connect with, and what do you have in common. And it will happen when it happens.
And also too, it's like you can't necessarily quantify what you got from that. So, okay, so maybe you didn't get, some kind of advancement, but if you do get value from helping someone who is now in the place where you were 5 years ago, and you give them a bit of advice, that's so powerful, and so you do get something from that. It's just not a thing, but it's you get to feel good, and you can't really. You can't. That's not a thing that you can hold, but it's just as valid as a business connection.
And I think, especially in the world we live in today, where we are online, things are more intangible and less, touching and feeling. That becomes even more and more important. Look, in the interest of time, I want to then pass over to questions from the floor. So we've got about 10 minutes before we break for afternoon tea. So any questions anyone has for anyone here on the panel? Yes.
There you go.
Whoever grabs that microphone first.
So I just recently heard Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, just achieved a 50-50 split of gender balance in his cabinet, which is phenomenal. But the thing that he said is that when he asked men to join the cabinet, they said yes. And when he asked women, he had to ask them 14 times before they said, no joke, seriously. So in the same vein of what we were talking about, how do we get more women involved in entrepreneurship? How do we get more women involved in investing? How do we get more women involved in in networking? Do we need to change the language? Do we need to change how we ask them? Do you have any advice for how we can be more inclusive and how we can change that so that we can ask in a way to get them to say yes the first time?
I suppose I'm just relayed how often I'm often almost down on my knees asking, women to speak at events and so forth. I mean, I think it is confidence building to a certain extent. I actually hate that word in relation to women because, when a lot of people say, women need more confidence, it's not that they need more confidence, I think they just need more encouragement because a lot of women have a huge amount of confidence. I mean, let's face it, if you've already started your own business, you need to be pretty confident in yourself that you've, got to that point. So I think it's really encouraging them, one, to be role models themselves, encouraging them to showcase themselves and their business. That's a little bit of the self-promotion. And I think also explaining to them that role of a role model is critical. It's not just, standing up on stage, but it is inspiring that whole generation of, and possibly 2 generations of women, coming up to do the same sort of thing.
I think there's probably a couple of components to that. So just about getting women in business, and this isn't just in startup land, this is also in corporate land as well. So, if you look at the WGA statistics, it's gone down. It was 17% of women were female CEOs, and now it's 15%. Women in key management positions is less than one in 4. And yet you're selling to Australians, you're selling to the world, and you're selling to women, yet you've got no one actually in the decision-making echelons of your company. So there's something fundamentally wrong with that. Women control 80% of all household spend. So just from that perspective, what we have is insane. It's just bonkers. So we do have to go up that management layer in corporates. And I think if we've got more corporates, there's more investment, there's more opportunities for partnerships. So I think we've got to shift that. And definitely it's role models. And it goes right back to, I think, what we were talking about earlier, which is, and I've just spent 5 months with one of the largest private educators in the world, and they've been 40 countries. And one of the things was, the the disconnect between education and industry. And they were still talking about, how do we get our students jobs? And it's like, well, it's actually not about jobs. Like, why aren't we talking about how people can monetize their time and their talent? Because that's really the old world of, like, you grew up, you went and worked for somebody. It doesn't need to be like that. We live in a world where the world is flat. We have so many opportunities to do so many incredible things. And women that do decide to go down the path of, being mums as well, have particular challenges just around time and how we use time. And actually the internet has probably been one of the best things for us from a career-wise, because it actually gives us a lot more flexibility. So I think, that there are great advantages there, but we just need to move that. And I think the other thing comes back to time and choices and priorities, which is, you look back 5 or 6 years ago, there probably wasn't the plethora of all these different women's networking groups and evenings and startup communities. And now there's just so many. It's like, well, which ones do I go to? So which ones do I choose when my life is so busy and I'm managing all of these different things? And potentially if you miss the mark with one thing you went to, you kind of question, should I invest my time in maybe trying this other one? So I think from both sides of the equation, if you run a forum or a networking event, make sure that your messaging is really, really clear. Make sure that audience delivers what you say you're going to deliver. So if it's around early stage startups, that's great. But if you have gone there for a particular reason and then it's completely off message, the audience isn't right, your chances are you'll question whether you'll invest your time in that again. So I think there's things to be done on both sides of that challenge.
Cath, anything you'd like to add to that question?
It's interesting because I think probably like a lot of Etsy sellers are parents, and I think we are probably have so many skills in time management that we don't realise, because we are trying to do 100 things. And I often get asked that question, how do you do it? I'm like, I just don't actually watch TV. Really, that's all it is. I don't watch TV. So that immediately gives you 15 hours or whatever a week where you it's not, you know what I mean? It's kind of like, well, there is time. You just have to think about what you're prepared to give up to do it. So my husband works nights. My kids are in bed, that's when I work. So, and that's just how our lives are set up, and that's how it is. But there's not this time thing is, the time's there, you've just got to prioritise it, And you have to be prepared to do the work. And a lot of it is boring, and especially with creative businesses, the hard thing that you realise really quickly is the creative bit is about that much. The actual designing fun bit is tiny. The rest of it is BAS and bookkeeping and, and all that other stuff, and social media stuff, which can be a bit creative, I guess. But the actual product design stuff is tiny, and that's really hard for creative people to get their head around. It's like you don't actually just get to paint all day in your studio, unfortunately. So later on maybe, but not when you're starting a business.
So we might go to another. I think the other thing on that is backing yourself. You've all, many of you here today have backed yourself into your own business. So when someone asks you the question, you've got the skills. And I think it's also being prepared to say you don't have all the answers, but no one does. I've never met a man that's got all the answers. And they don't make any apologies for that. And I think sometimes it's that transparency of not having the answers but finding it out. And I think one of the things actually going for a lot of small business owners is they're naturally inquisitive. And I think we can, use that to sort of a strength. We had another question.
Yes, hello there. When I first started my business a couple of years ago, or at least incorporated it as a company, I've always really struggled with networking and struggled with public speaking. I've tried to push past it. But coming into a room has been an extremely difficult exercise for me. And in fact, for the 10 years prior to that in my corporate career, I never went out for drinks after work. I never really wanted to meet with anyone. It wasn't for lack of wanting to, and it's not like I'm not an extrovert. I love chatting with people, but I found it very hard to start a conversation. And the other day I saw, I guess just talking about the operational, yes, we can talk about the strategy and stuff, but sometimes it comes down to the grassroots and what you actually get done on the ground. And this is something that we think about at Startup Victoria and the Female Founders Committee with some of the events that we run for women. But I saw a beautiful video online about a school in America that's created this thing called a buddy bench. And basically when someone's walking around alone at primary school, which I think I used to do a bit, you can go and sit on this buddy bench and someone will come up and sit next to you and start talking to you because they know that you're feeling awkward. And I kind of think everyone feels like that in a networking space. Is there something operational that we can do, like a buddy bench, right, that helps people feel comfortable to go, hey, this person looks a bit lonely, let's introduce them into our convo, rather than kind of randomly standing behind people and going, when should I insert myself in the conversation? I'm feeling really awkward right now.
It's a great idea.
That just sort of reminds me, I mean, I think what a lot of women find, particularly when you're young, you find very intimidating is when you go into those networking events and it's a room full of suits. And, you know, you're sort of looking for the odd woman because you think that, you know, she will be safe. But actually, I think that the best strategy in that situation is to go out and seek the person who is on their own, who's sitting there on the bench on their own, and go and introduce yourself. Or the person who's pretending to be on their phone, you know, in the corner. You know, Facebook is really important, you know, and go and introduce yourself. And that way you start chatting to that person and you know, you've developed your group, and before you know it, other people, you know, come in and start joining that group.
I just say, if it actually is a room of men, you are happy days. Like, everyone wants you to join their group. So if there is a group of guys and you just go, hi, they just stop conversation and there you are. So I actually think it's much easier because everyone's like, they actually feel great that there's a couple of females in the room. It's actually much easier sometimes than maybe a group of women. So, you know, sometimes just your sex can work to your advantage. So just work it, ladies.
I just wanted to comment just on sort of general comments. You know, I think we shouldn't confuse networking with Twitter followers, you know, metaphorically speaking, because it's not about how many people you know, it's the value of the connections you make. And I can't tell you how annoyed I get, and I maybe shouldn't say this in this room, but, you know, to get a LinkedIn invitation from somebody that either I don't know or I may have met at a networking event with no message. And I don't respond to those, and I don't do that, because if I meet somebody, or if somebody wants something from me that I might have to offer, or vice versa, I want to connect with them on some level and let them know what I want. And so when, you know, my advice to you, because I get asked so much to have a coffee, and if I had coffees with everybody who asked, I'd probably be dead now because of caffeine. But I can tell you, you know, I can probably count on one hand how many of those people asked me at the end, what can I do for you? Thank you so much for spending time with me, giving me your experience. So what can I do for you? And, you know, most of the time at that particular point, it takes me by surprise, so I don't have anything. But the fact is, I say, well, keep in touch with me and let me know your progress. Let me know how you're going, because there may be something else I can do. So I think, and time, you know, the poverty of time for women is different than for men. So men have a lot more time to network, but they also use their networks more intelligently. They actually ask for something, and their buddies give it to them. So the other thing I'm saying to women is be more generous with giving, and put yourself out there as a giver. So don't, you know, when you know, the whole thing of, do you recommend other women for boards, for instance, how many women actually recommend other women for boards? I think it happens a little bit more now, but I can tell you 5 years ago, the woman was so afraid of putting herself out there and being accused of being a feminist or something horrible, God forbid, that she wouldn't actually recommend other women. So it's putting yourself out there on both sides of that equation. And lastly, I love quoting Madeleine Albright, who said there's a special place in hell for women who won't support other women.
Well, look, on that note, can you please thank our panel this afternoon? Awesome.